Throughout history, the Jewish people have faced persistent persecution and hardship. From slavery in ancient Egypt to modern political hostility, theirs is a story marked not only by suffering but by astonishing survival. That very survival is in itself miraculous. So much so that even secular thinkers struggle to explain it with logic alone. They might point to strategic advantages in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War or the lightning-fast victory of the 1967 Six-Day War, citing superior military planning or international support. But against overwhelming odds and sheer numbers, Israel's continued endurance often defies conventional analysis. The Jewish people have contributed immensely to civilization, building, innovating, and shaping entire movements and industries. They've left an indelible mark on philosophy, economics, cinema, technology, and medicine. Yet over and over, these contributions are adopted, distorted, or erased by those who fail to acknowledge their origin. What remains consistent is Jewish resilience and an uncanny pattern. Empires that turn against the Jewish people eventually collapse. Those that support them flourish, if only temporarily. Let's explore that pattern across history, starting with a tally of the major moments of persecution. 1. Ancient Egypt. The birth of persecution, the earliest record of oppression, begins with Pharaoh, who enslaved the Hebrews and triggered the biblical narrative of deliverance. "Let my people go" marked the beginning of a long journey, both literal and prophetic. 2 Assyrian and 3 Babylonian empires, exile and captivity. These superpowers decimated the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel, respectively, scattering Jewish communities and destroying their sovereignty. Yet from exile rose a new Jewish identity rooted in study, resilience, and prayer. Assyrian and Babylonian empires, exile and captivity. These superpowers delivered back-to-back blows to the Jewish kingdoms. The Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel around 722 BCE, deporting the 10 lost tribes and scattering them across their empire. Just over a century later, the Babylonians captured the southern kingdom of Judah, destroying Solomon's temple in 586 BCE and exiling the elites to Babylon. These twin catastrophes didn't just shatter Jewish sovereignty, they forced a transformation from temple-centered worship to the roots of rabbinic Judaism. Exile became the crucible that forged survival. 4. Greek Empire, cultural suppression under Antiochus IV. Under Hellenistic rule, particularly with Antiochus IV, Jews were forced to abandon their traditions. The Maccabean revolt and the miracle of Hanukkah were born from this resistance. 5. Roman Empire, destruction of the Second Temple. In 70 CE, the Roman Empire destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem, a devastating blow to Jewish religious and national life. This marks the beginning of a long exile as Jews were scattered across the empire in what became the diaspora. But Rome didn't stop there. Following the Bar Kokhba revolt 132 to 135 CE, Emperor Hadrian sought to erase Jewish identity from the land entirely, renaming Judea to Syria Palestina, a deliberate insult meant to sever the Jewish connection to their ancestral homeland by referencing their ancient enemies, the Philistines. This act of cultural erasure helped entrench centuries of anti-Semitism and historical distortion. 6. Church-led anti-Semitism, from pulpit to persecution. Following the fall of Rome, Christian Europe built its theological foundations on both reverence and resentment. Early church fathers accused the Jews of deicide, killing God, a charge that fueled centuries of hatred, blood libels, in which Jews were falsely accused of using Christian children's blood for ritual. Spread widely, forced ghettos, yellow badges, barred professions, and expulsions became standard across many kingdoms. Even papal decrees sanctioned legal and social exclusion. This wasn't random violence. It was systematized oppression, often wrapped in sacred language. The very institution that preached forgiveness cultivated suspicion and segregation. 7. Medieval Europe, the Inquisition and expulsions. Spain, once a hub of Jewish culture, turned vicious during the Inquisition. Jews were tortured, forcibly converted, or expelled. The 1492 expulsion coincided with Spain's Golden Age, but marked the beginning of its long imperial decline. 8. Ottoman Empire, limited tolerance and unequal treatment. Muslim caliphates and the Ottoman Empire, colonizers with conditional tolerance. Though often portrayed as more tolerant than European Christian empires, the truth is that Muslim rule across the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe was colonial in nature, expanding through conquest, not invitation. Islam originated in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, and within just a few generations, Muslim armies swept across vast regions. North Africa, from Egypt across to modern-day Morocco, subjugating Berber, Christian, and Jewish populations. Southern Europe, including parts of Spain, Al-Andalus, Sicily, and the Balkans. The Middle East, including Persia, modern-day Iran, Babylonia, modern-day Iraq, and the historic Jewish heartlands of Judea and Galilee. This was imperial conquest, not liberation. Jews, along with Christians, were classified as dhimmis. Non-Muslims granted limited protection in exchange for accepting second-class legal status, paying the jizya tax, and abiding by restrictive laws. Under the Ottoman Empire, which emerged in the 14th century and dominated much of this territory for centuries, Jewish communities were allowed to exist, but only within narrow, conditional limits. They were often confined to specific quarters or roles. They faced legal discrimination and social inferiority. Their safety and rights were never guaranteed, but rather dependent on the whims of the Sultan or local governors. While not as overtly genocidal as some European regimes, this so-called tolerance was paternalistic and coercive, and it occurred within a system of colonization that stripped entire regions, including Jewish homelands, of their autonomy and identity. 9. Nazi Germany, the Holocaust and Arab collaboration. 6 million Jews were exterminated in the most systematic and industrialized genocide in human history. Nazi Germany, once admired as a center of science, philosophy, and art, descended into a moral abyss. Driven by racial hatred, pseudoscience, and totalitarian control, the Holocaust not only destroyed Jewish communities across Europe, it left an enduring scar on global conscience. But what's often overlooked is Hitler's collaboration with certain Arab raiders in the Middle East, especially in Palestinian territory. One of the most prominent figures was Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was an open supporter of the Nazi regime. He met personally with Hitler in 1941 and encouraged the extermination of Jews, not just in Europe, but also in the Middle East. Al-Husseini actively helped recruit Muslim SS units in the Balkans, blocked Jewish refugees from the steppe into Palestine, spread Nazi-style anti-Semitic propaganda to anti-Arab Jews. This alliance shows that anti-Semitism in the region was not merely a response to later political events, but was already being fueled by ideological, religious, and strategic motives long before the modern state of Israel existed. Germany paid a heavy price for its crimes, but the ideologies it exported and the alliances it built during this time had long-term effects that still shape anti-Jewish sentiment in the Middle East today. 10. The Soviet Union, religious repression and forced assimilation. Under Stalin and his successors, Judaism was suppressed, Hebrew banned, and Jewish identity punished, ironically. When over 2 million Jews were later released to Israel, Russia briefly experienced an economic and cultural revival. 11. Present-day terrorism and radical regimes. Modern anti-Semitism often surfaces in extremist Islamist ideologies and global terror networks. While cloaked in political rhetoric, the underlying aim remains the same: to dehumanize and destroy the Jewish people. So here's where your idea of the 10 plagues metaphor comes into striking focus. But is that the full count based on the deeper dive we just took together? Not quite. Holy war and holy consequences. While the Crusades were launched by Christian Europe to reclaim the Holy Land from Islamic control, Jewish communities far from the battlefield were swept up in the fanaticism. As crusaders marched through Europe, mobs massacred Jews in cities like Worms, Speyer, and Mainz. Entire communities wiped out in the Rhineland. These attacks weren't sanctioned by the church, yet they exposed how deeply anti-Semitism had taken root in the European psyche. Jews were not the intended enemy, yet they suffered terribly under the banner of religious righteousness. 13. Eastern European pogroms, blood and fire in the Pale. In the Russian Empire, especially during the 18th and 19th centuries, Jews were confined to the Pale of settlement, restricted in movement, rights, and opportunities. Pogroms, violent riots, often incited or tolerated by authorities, left thousands dead, injured, or homeless. These events weren't isolated. They became recurring eruptions of hatred that pushed millions to flee to Western Europe, the Americas, and ultimately to what would become Israel. 14. The Dreyfus Affair. France's moral collapse in 1894. Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish French officer, was wrongfully convicted of treason. The scandal revealed deep veins of anti-Semitism within a society that prided itself on liberty and justice. Public hysteria, media-fueled bigotry, and the slow machinery of injustice led many Jews to abandon hope of assimilation in Western Europe. The fallout helped ignite Zionism as a survival imperative, not just a spiritual dream. 15. Iran and state-sponsored hatred. In modern times, Iran has emerged as a beacon of theocratic anti-Semitism. Its leaders have denied the Holocaust, called for Israel's destruction, and funded militant groups that target Jewish civilians globally. Though not representative of all Iranians, this regime draws from the same historical current, targeting Jews as a means of consolidating power or deflecting blame. Iran and state-sponsored hatred. In modern times, the Islamic Republic of Iran has become a leading exporter of anti-Semitic ideology. Its leaders have openly denied the Holocaust, called for Israel's annihilation, and supplied militant groups like Hezbollah and Hamas with weapons and funding. This isn't reflected of all Iranians. Many within and beyond Iran's borders oppose this rhetoric. But at the state level, hatred of Jews and Zionism is institutionalized as political doctrine. In doing so, the regime places itself in the company of empires that have historically turned on the Jewish people and paid the price for it.
21st century cultural anti-Semitism, the new cloak. In today's world, anti-Semitism doesn't always wear a swastika. It sometimes wears a university sweatshirt or a social justice badge cloaked as criticism of Israel or economic systems. The same age-old tropes resurface. Jews as manipulators, infiltrators, or oppressors, cancel culture, selective outrage, and institutional silence often allow this bias to fester in supposedly progressive spaces. 17. Digital anti-Semitism. The algorithm of hate in the age of algorithms. Hatred has become code. Conspiracies once whispered in the shadows now trend globally within hours. TikTok, YouTube, and X, formerly Twitter, often amplify posts that lean into outrage, especially those dressed as anti-Zionist, but dripping in classic anti-Semitic tropes. Holocaust denial has found stylish rebranding. Memes carry venom, bots swarm Jewish creators. For younger generations, digital distortion becomes their first exposure to Jewish identity. Unlike past regimes, this plague has no borders, no face, and no single empire behind it. It's decentralized hatred, harder to pin down and harder to stop. Now, about that number. I began with a striking concept of 10 major persecutions, symbolically linked to the 10 plagues of Egypt. It's a compelling parallel, but as we've seen in tracing this history, the count goes beyond 10. Does that mean this theory collapses? Not at all. In fact, it underscores my point. These aren't isolated curses. They're a continuing pattern, echoing across time, geography, and ideology. Each new persecution could be viewed not as an exception, but as a new plague for each generation, evidence that the pattern is real, active in calling out for resolution. And perhaps the lesson isn't that the cycle will magically end at 10, but that we are responsible for stopping the count before it becomes endless. Many people wouldn't openly admit this claim, but I will, and I thank God for his involvement. No matter how terrible things get in the Middle East, like in Syria or the areas where millions have been murdered, including children, people still focus only on one small country. That's wrong. No matter what dinner one attains or what side one takes, there's always gonna be persecution, yet even in the face of greater atrocities, the world stays fixated. This, to me, proves the power of God. The light, I choose to focus on that light. Even if what is good is now considered evil, that's my evidence. And still, many deny it. We, the Jewish people, don't view miracles the way the rest of the world does. For us, miracles are woven into the everyday. Our eyes are always set beyond the present, no matter what. Throughout history, the Jewish people have faced numerous persecutions and challenges, yet they have managed to survive and thrive. Even Jews themselves, including those who are not religious, may not fully appreciate the miraculous nature of their people's survival. Instead, people without faith in God may try to explain it through logic. For example, some might point to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, or the 1967 Six-Day War where Israel faced off against multiple countries. They might try to use logic to explain Israel's victories, citing factors like military strategy, advanced weaponry, or international support. However, despite being outnumbered, Israel emerged victorious, often against significant odds. The Jewish people have made significant contributions to the world, building and creating things that have had a lasting impact. For example, Jewish thinkers have played a role in shaping ideologies like communism and capitalism. Jewish people have also been instrumental in the creation of Hollywood, helping to shape the film industry into what it is today, and many other inventions and technologies. However, these contributions are often adopted and corrupted by others. Despite this, the Jewish people have consistently demonstrated resilience and determinism. If we examine the history of the Jewish people, we can see a pattern of persecution and hardship. Let's count the significant events. Ancient Egypt, Pharaoh's enslavement. 2. Assyrian Empire. 3. Babylonian Empire. 4. Greek Empire under Antiochus IV. 5. Roman Empire, destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple. 6. Spanish Inquisition and other medieval persecutions. 7. Ottoman Empire's treatment of Jews in the Middle East. 8. Nazi Germany, the Holocaust. 9. Soviet Union's persecution of Jews under Stalin. 10. Extreme Muslim regimes and terrorist groups. Present day. If we count these events, it seems we're up to 10 significant persecutions or challenges. Perhaps this pattern is connected to the 10 plagues that were inflicted upon ancient Egypt. If so, it could signal a new beginning, where the Jewish people can either contribute to global peace or force God to intervene, bringing everlasting peace. If you had to count all of these things that happened to Jewish people, were they being persecuted or facing challenges, starting from the time of Pharaoh, "Let my people go," and continuing on through history? It seems we're nearing a significant milestone. What's important to remember is the biblical principle: bless those who bless us and curse those who curse us. If you look at these empires, you'll notice a pattern. Those who blessed the Jewish people were often blessed in return, experiencing rapid success and prosperity. For example, when Russia released 2 million Jews to Israel, they experienced a temporary period of prosperity. On the other hand, those who cursed the Jewish people often suffered a gradual decline and eventual downfall. They were doing amazingly well until the moment they decided to attack the Jewish people, and then their fortunes changed almost overnight. This pattern can be seen in the rise and fall of empires throughout history. Let's take a closer look at some of these empires. The Roman Empire, for instance, was a dominant world power until it began to persecute the Jewish people. The Spanish Empire, which was once a major world power, also suffered a decline after its persecution of Jews. The Nazi Empire, which was a dominant force in Europe, ultimately met its downfall after attempting to eradicate the Jewish people. This pattern is not limited to ancient history in modern times. We can see the same principle at work. Take the United States, for example. After they got involved in World War II and helped the Jewish people, they became an empire. Many people might come up with excuses or try to explain it away, but the fact remains that those who bless the Jews are often blessed in return. Now let's look at the current situation. The Democratic Party, which has been accused of being enemies of the Jews, might experience a decline if they continue to tear down the Jewish people. On the other hand, leaders like Trump, who have stood up for the Jewish people, might experience prosperity and success. However, if the next leader decides not to respect the Jewish people, the empire might decline again. The principle remains the same. Bless those who bless us and curse those who curse us. All you have to do is look at history to see this pattern at work. No matter what logic you use or how you try to explain it away, the end result is always the same. When the end comes, you cannot fight it. The consequences of cursing the Jewish people are clear, and it's up to each nation and leader to decide their own path. We are not waiting for miracles, we are one. The survival of the Jewish people is not magic, it is meaning, a pattern etched not just in history books, but in the moral architecture of the world. The plagues were never meant to stop at 10. They were meant to teach us when we must say enough. When evil is rebranded as virtue, when truth is buried under convenience, light becomes resistance. That's our legacy. That's the warning. And that's the truth some still deny, because it demands a choice.